Good evening. A report attributed to unnamed palace insiders suggested that Princess Charlotte, the only daughter of the Prince and Princess of Wales, may have been quietly designated as the future primary custodian of certain historic royal heirlooms. The wording was careful, not owner, not officially, but something close enough to ignite conversation. And once the idea entered the public sphere, it spread rapidly, drawing attention, speculation, and inevitably reaction. Because if true, even within this fictional narrative, it would mark a subtle but meaningful shift in how royal legacy is passed down. Before diving deeper, it's important to understand a central truth about royal assets. In most cases, they are not privately owned in the traditional sense. Royal jewels, artifacts, and collections are often held in trust, as part of the royal collection, or as items tied to specific roles within the monarchy. This means that ownership is rarely personal, it is institutional. Yet the idea that Princess Charlotte might one day become the primary figure associated with certain pieces introduces something new, a shift from role based assignment to identity based legacy, and that distinction is what fuels the story. Though still young, Princess Charlotte has already captured public attention. Confident, composed, and often described as strikingly self assured, she represents a new generation of royal presence, one that blends tradition with modern relatability. In this fictional narrative, the idea of Charlotte becoming closely linked with royal heirlooms, particularly those connected to Princess Diana, feels symbolically powerful. She is the daughter of the future king, the granddaughter of Diana's legacy, and the only princess of her generation within the direct line. To some observers, this makes her a natural figure to carry forward certain traditions. At the center of the discussion lies one name that continues to shape the monarchy's emotional landscape: Diana. Princess Diana's jewelry, style, and public image remain deeply embedded in global memory. For years, Catherine has been seen as the primary figure carrying that legacy, wearing Diana's engagement ring, her iconic tiaras, and other historic pieces. But in this imagined scenario, a question begins to emerge. What happens next? When Catherine's role evolves further, when the next generation steps forward, who carries that legacy then? The suggestion that Charlotte may eventually inherit, or at least be associated with, these pieces introduces a new narrative, one that bridges past and future. As speculation grows in this fictional account, the palace response is silence. No confirmation, no denial, just the continuation of official duties and carefully managed appearances. This silence is not unusual. In fact, it often serves a purpose, because by not addressing speculation directly, the palace allows narratives to settle naturally, without giving them formal weight. Yet in doing so, it also leaves space for interpretation. And interpretation in royal matters is powerful. As the story spreads, public reaction becomes increasingly divided. Support for the idea. Some view the concept positively. They see Charlotte as a natural heir to certain symbolic roles, particularly those tied to Diana. It makes sense, one imagined commentator might say. She represents the next chapter. For this group, the idea feels like continuity, a passing of the torch, a way of preserving legacy through generational connection. Others, however, express caution. They question whether such a shift, if true, would disrupt established royal practices. These items belong to the crown, not individuals, another voice might argue. Changing that could set a precedent. For them, the issue is not Charlotte herself, but the implications of redefining ownership. And then there are those who simply watch with interest. For them, the story is less about controversy and more about curiosity. What does this mean for the future? How might the monarchy evolve? What role will Charlotte ultimately play? As often happens in royal narratives, the story takes an unexpected turn. Queen Camilla's name begins to appear in discussions, not through official statements, but through speculation. In this fictional scenario, rumors emerge suggesting that Camilla may have privately expressed reservations about how certain heirlooms are allocated. The reasoning, according to imagined sources, centers on balance. ensuring that royal assets remain tied to the institution rather than shifting toward individual association. At this point, the story deepens because beneath the surface lies a broader theme, two overlapping legacies within the monarchy: Diana's legacy, emotional, public facing, deeply personal; Camilla's legacy, institutional, gradual, focused on stability. These legacies do not necessarily conflict, but they do represent different approaches to royal identity. And in this fictional narrative, the question of Charlotte's ownership becomes a focal point where those approaches intersect. Within this imagined story, attention turns to the Wales family. How do William and Catherine respond? Publicly, they remain unchanged, calm, measured, focused on duty. But privately, one can imagine conversations taking place not about controversy, but about the future, about how to prepare their children for roles they will one day inherit, and about how to balance tradition with individuality. As the future king, William occupies a unique position. He is both a guardian of tradition and a driver of modernization. In this fictional narrative, his approach is pragmatic. He understands the importance of symbolism, but he also recognizes the need for evolution. For William, the idea of Charlotte eventually carrying forward certain aspects of Diana's legacy may feel natural, not as a break from tradition, but as a continuation of it. Catherine, meanwhile, remains central to the story. As the current figure most closely associated with Diana's legacy, her position is both symbolic and practical. In this imagined account, she does not resist the idea of Charlotte's future role. Instead, she embraces it, quietly, thoughtfully. Because for Catherine, legacy is not something to be held indefinitely, it is something to be passed on. At its core, this story is not about legal ownership, it is about symbolism. Who represents what? Who carries which narrative? Who becomes the face of a particular legacy? And in that sense, the idea of Charlotte as a future custodian, whether formal or symbolic, holds weight because symbols shape perception, and perception shapes the monarchy. As the story continues to evolve, media coverage expands. Headlines become more direct. Princess Charlotte tipped as future keeper of royal jewels. Camilla reportedly questions shift in royal traditions. A new generation, a new approach. Each article adds a layer. Each interpretation fuels further discussion. Because once a narrative takes hold, it rarely remains static. Despite all the speculation, one thing remains clear: there is no definitive confirmation, no official announcement, no concrete evidence, only interpretation. And perhaps that is what makes the story so compelling. It exists in possibility, in imagination, in the space between what is known and what might be. Looking ahead, within this fictional framework, the question remains: how will the monarchy define legacy in the years to come? Will it remain strictly tied to roles? Or will it become more flexible, allowing individuals to shape their own symbolic identities? Princess Charlotte's imagined position in this story represents that crossroads, a point where tradition meets transformation. In the end, this fictional narrative is less about ownership and more about evolution. It explores how legacy is defined, how tradition adapts, and how new generations reshape old institutions. Princess Charlotte, in this story, becomes more than a child of the monarchy. She becomes a symbol of what comes next. And whether or not any of these claims hold truth, one thing is certain: the future of the monarchy will not look exactly like its past. And that, perhaps, is its greatest strength. In the days following the growing speculation within this fictional narrative, the atmosphere inside royal residences subtly shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but perceptibly. Because while the palace had remained publicly silent, internally, the conversation could no longer be ignored. What had begun as an external rumor had now crossed an invisible threshold, becoming a subject of quiet discussion within the family itself. And in royal life, that is where stories truly begin to matter. According to this imagined account, a small private meeting was arranged at Clarence House. No aides present, no official agenda, just senior members of the family, gathered not as public figures, but as individuals navigating a shared reality. Present in this fictional scene, King Charles III, Queen Camilla, Prince William, Princess Catherine. And though not physically present, the subject of the conversation, Princess Charlotte, remained at the center of it all. The tone, as expected, was measured. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, the discussion began with a question, simple but loaded with implication. Where did this come from? King Charles, ever composed, is imagined to have asked, because for him, the issue was not just the rumor itself, but its potential impact. Rumors shape perception, and perception shapes the monarchy. In this fictional narrative, Queen Camilla is the first to address the underlying concern. Her voice, calm but firm, reflects years of navigating scrutiny. It's not about Charlotte, she is imagined to say, it's about what this suggests. For Camilla, the idea that heirlooms could be perceived as shifting toward individual ownership carries risk. Not personal risk, institutional risk. Because once tradition is seen as flexible, expectations begin to change, and managing expectations is one of the monarchy's most delicate tasks. Prince William, sitting across from her, listens carefully. His response is thoughtful, not defensive, not dismissive, but reflective. Perhaps, he suggests in this imagined exchange, it's not about changing tradition, but about how it's understood. For William, the distinction matters. He sees Charlotte not as an owner, but as a future representative, someone who may carry forward meaning, not possession. And in that nuance lies a generational shift. Throughout the conversation, Catherine remains composed, observing, listening, and when she speaks, her words are measured. Legacy isn't static. She is imagined to say softly, it lives through people. Her perspective bridges both sides. She respects tradition deeply, but she also understands symbolism instinctively. Having carried Diana's legacy herself, she knows that these roles are not assigned solely by protocol. They are shaped by presence, by connection, by public perception. As the discussion unfolds, the true nature of the concern becomes clear. It is not about Charlotte, not really. It is about control of narrative. Who defines legacy? Who represents it? And how much flexibility the monarchy allows itself in a changing world. For Charles, the priority is unity. For Camilla, stability. For William and Catherine, continuity with evolution. These perspectives do not clash openly, but they do not align perfectly either. In this fictional account, the conversation reaches a quiet turning point. Camilla, still composed, raises a subtle but pointed concern. If people begin to believe these things belong to individuals, she says, what happens to the institution? The room for a moment stills, because the question is not rhetorical, it is fundamental, and it carries weight. King Charles, long accustomed to navigating complexity, responds with characteristic care. We must not react to every rumor, he is imagined to say. But neither can we ignore what they reveal. For Charles, the situation is not a crisis, but it is a signal, a reflection of how the public is beginning to interpret the monarchy's future, and that he knows cannot be dismissed. As the meeting draws on, one question emerges. Should the palace respond, clarify, or remain silent? Each option carries consequences. Responding gives the story legitimacy. Clarifying risks overcomplication. Silence allows speculation to continue. In this fictional narrative, the decision leans toward silence, not out of avoidance, but out of strategy, because sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. While these private discussions unfold, the public narrative continues to grow. Experts, commentators, and royal watchers analyze every angle. Some defend the idea of Charlotte as a symbolic successor. Others question the implications. And some, perhaps most, simply watch with fascination because stories like this tap into something deeper than protocol. They touch on identity, on legacy, on the future. Amid all of this, one detail remains quietly grounding. Princess Charlotte herself, within this fictional story, is unaware of the storm surrounding her. She continues her days as any child would, learning, playing, growing, unburdened by the narratives forming around her. And in that innocence lies a contrast to the complexity unfolding elsewhere. In the weeks that follow, small changes begin to appear, not dramatic, not officially acknowledged, but noticeable to those who look closely. Catherine, at a formal event, is imagined to wear a piece of jewelry not associated with Diana. At another appearance, she chooses something modern. These choices, subtle as they are, begin to shape perception. Are they intentional, coincidental, or simply part of a broader balance? In royal life, the answer is often all three. For Camilla, the response remains consistent: no public comment, no visible reaction, just steady presence. Because she understands something crucial: time reshapes narratives, and patience often outlasts speculation. For William and Catherine, the focus shifts, not on the rumor, but on the future. Their priority is not to control the story, but to live beyond it, to raise their children with awareness, but not pressure, to honor legacy without being confined by it, and to shape a monarchy that reflects both history and humanity. Perhaps the most important realization in this fictional chapter is this: the monarchy, for all its structure and symbolism, is still a family, and families do not always agree. They navigate, they adjust, they find balance over time. The conversation at Clarence House does not end with resolution, but it does end with understanding, and sometimes that is enough. In this chapter, the story moves inward, from public speculation to private conversation, from headlines to human dynamics. And in doing so, it reveals something deeper: that the future of the monarchy is not decided in announcements, but in moments of quiet dialogue behind closed doors. Princess Charlotte may or may not become a symbolic owner of legacy, but what truly matters is how that legacy is defined and who defines it. By the time the third phase of this unfolding story takes shape within this fictional narrative, the conversation is no longer confined to headlines or speculation. It has become something larger: a debate, a reflection, a question that extends far beyond Princess Charlotte herself. Who shapes the future of royal legacy? Across media platforms, talk shows, and social spaces, the discussion intensifies, not because of new facts, but because of growing interpretation. And interpretation, once shared widely enough, begins to feel like reality. Unlike moments of overt controversy, this division is subtle, measured, respectful, but unmistakable. Group 1: the traditionalists. This group believes firmly in preserving the established structure of royal tradition. To them, the idea of associating heirlooms with individuals, especially so early, feels premature. These items belong to the crown, one imagined historian argues. They are not symbols of personality, but of continuity. For them, stability lies in consistency, and consistency lies in rules that do not change easily. On the other side are those who embrace evolution. They see Charlotte not as a disruption, but as a natural progression. A new generation brings new meaning, a commentator suggests. Why shouldn't legacy evolve with the people who carry it? To this group, symbolism is not fixed. It grows, adapts, finds new expression. Between these perspectives lies a larger, quieter group: people who are not invested in taking sides, but are deeply interested in what the story represents. Because beyond the debate, there is fascination. How does an institution rooted in centuries adapt to a modern world? And how do individuals within it shape that adaptation? As the divide becomes clearer, media coverage intensifies, not dramatically, but persistently. Headlines grow more pointed. Is the monarchy quietly redefining ownership? Princess Charlotte and the future of royal identity? Camilla's alleged concerns spark wider debate. Each article adds a layer, each interpretation sharpens the conversation. And slowly, the story shifts from curiosity to cultural moment. Inside palace walls, within this fictional narrative, the approach begins to adapt, not in response to pressure, but in anticipation of where the story might lead. A quiet strategy emerges, not to confirm, not to deny, but to redirect. The shift becomes visible during a major royal event, a formal ceremony widely covered, widely watched, and at its center, Princess Catherine. But this time, something is different. Standing beside her, just for a brief moment, is Princess Charlotte, not in a formal role, not in a staged presentation, but present, visible, part of the moment. What Charlotte wears within this imagined scene becomes the focal point, a small, elegant piece, subtle, appropriate, but unmistakably historic. Not one of Diana's most iconic items, but something connected, something symbolic, and instantly the conversation reignites. Was it planned? Was it meaningful? Or was it simply a choice interpreted beyond its intention? The palace offers no explanation, but the effect is undeniable. Because in royal life, symbolism does not require confirmation, it exists in perception. The response is immediate. Social media surges again. Did you see what Charlotte was wearing? Is this the confirmation everyone was waiting for? This feels intentional. For supporters of the earlier rumor, it feels like validation. For skeptics, it feels like coincidence exaggerated. And for observers, it feels like something in between. As Charlotte's appearance draws attention, speculation around Queen Camilla resurfaces. In this fictional narrative, reports suggest she remains unchanged in her stance, not opposed, not confrontational, but cautious. Her perspective, rooted in experience, remains focused on protecting the structure of the monarchy, because for Camilla, stability is not optional, it is essential. At this stage, King Charles makes a move, not a statement, not a correction, but a gesture. During a subsequent engagement, he is seen speaking warmly with Charlotte, guiding her gently, including her naturally. The message is quiet, but clear. She is part of the future, not defined, not assigned, but included. At the center of this evolving narrative stand William and Catherine, not reacting, not defending, but embodying balance. They neither confirm the speculation nor distance themselves from it. Instead, they continue forward, allowing their actions to speak without explanation. And in doing so, they achieve something rare. They control the narrative without appearing to control it. For Charlotte herself, this chapter, fictional as it is, marks a subtle shift, not in responsibility, but in visibility. She is no longer just a child within the royal family. She is becoming a symbol within its future. And symbols, once recognized, begin to carry meaning, whether intended or not. As the story reaches this stage, the original question begins to change. It is no longer, is Charlotte the new owner? It becomes, what does ownership even mean in a modern monarchy? Is it possession, representation, connection, or something entirely new? What this fictional narrative ultimately reveals is not a conflict, but a transition, a shift from rigid definitions to more fluid interpretations, from tradition as rule to tradition as framework. And within that framework, individuals like Charlotte begin to shape meaning in new ways. One of the most striking aspects of this story is its lack of resolution. There is no confirmation, no denial, no clear answer, and yet the story feels complete. Because in royal life, ambiguity is not weakness, it is strategy. It allows the institution to evolve without declaring that it has. In this final chapter, the story reaches its most important realization that the monarchy is not defined solely by what it says, but by what it allows people to believe Princess Charlotte may or may not become a symbolic owner of legacy. But she represents something undeniable, the future. And the future, by its nature, is not fixed. It is shaped gradually, quietly, and often without announcement.